Good morning, all, once again. It is a pleasure to come back after these 3 years hiatus, back to your beautiful city, beautiful weather. And we have beautiful Dharma to share during these 5 days together. Something quite unusual, actually, I think. And that is, I know those of you who are attending classes regularly at the Vajrayana Institute, so I was just told, have already had recently an introduction to the life, the quite extraordinary life of Atisha, one of the greatest Pandits, Siddhas, Bodhisattvas, monks in the whole history of Indian Buddhism. And I feel a very, very strong resonance with him, very deep faith, exceptional faith, because he really simply strikes me as the perfect monk, the perfect Bodhisattva, the perfect scholar, the perfect Siddha, all of them. And renowned in his time and renowned in India, even to this day, even among non-Buddhists. And so, if time allows, during our 5 days together, we'll take a close look at 2 dialogues between this great, great Indian master and his principal disciple in Tibet, Domdumba, which are I think, very rarely studied, almost never taught nowadays, buried in a thick volume of Atisha's teachings. But I plucked them out. I thought the teachings here in these 2 dialogues are extremely relevant to our times, to our modern times, hence ancient wisdom for modern times. Atisha's wisdom, it is Buddhist wisdom, and it is timeless. And I think that may become more and more evident to all of you as we listen in on their dialogues. So 2 dialogues covering the root of suffering, blaming everything on one culprit. Those of you who've practiced the 7-point mind training, you already know what that is. And then finally, at least for the last day of our 5 days here, we'll look, I think, quite carefully, I hope quite carefully, at a text actually composed by Atisha, a root text, a quintessential text on Mahamudra. And he was truly a Mahamudra master. He was trained by the great Naropa and other Mahasiddhas of India, and he brought this lineage also to Tibet. So we're in for a very rich banquet of teachings by Atisha, but first of all, in dialogue with his principal disciple. So this again is something quite unusual. I've translated by now many, many texts of written texts, and written in the 8th century, the 15th century, the 19th century, and so forth. And the Tibetan, remarkably, is quite similar, whether the text was actually written down 800 years ago or 80 years ago. Not much difference, but quite remarkable. But when it comes colloquial Tibetan, spoken Tibetan, then we're going to be, as it were, doing our best to slip into kind of a time machine and go back 1,000 years to Tibet, where this great Indian master is speaking in southern Tibet with a native Tibetan, and they're speaking colloquial Tibetan. And taking that, imagine taking English from 1,000 years ago. How similar would that English be to how we speak today? Not very. And so it was quite a challenge, but a very rewarding one. And yesterday afternoon, having already sent an old version of my translation to Rain, and then I said, well, here's a new one. And then after sending a new one, I kept on editing and polishing and polishing and polishing. And so I won't even say now it's final. But as I keep on meditating on it, and then points of clarity keep on coming up. So for right now, I have the only current version. And I won't give you another one until we're finished, because by the time we finish these 2 days or so, this is going to be different also. That's just the nature of the beast. And I think it's kind of a good thing. It shows my understanding hasn't frozen. And as I keep on returning, because, this is a dialogue. That's exactly what it is. You'll see it's just going back and forth, back and forth. But as you enter into a text, you enter into a dialogue with the text itself. You're listening, but you're not listening as a mute. You're listening with a fully active mind that is responding and so forth. And so you're responding, but what do you mean by that? And then you listen more. And then what do you mean by that? And then you either go into silence or you read more carefully. And so I've been having a dialogue. It's really quite a wonderful dialogue with Atisha and Domdumba, especially over the last couple of days. I feel that both very good friends by now. And Atisha, many of you may know, widely regarded among Gelupas and other great masters of the Tibetan tradition, Atisha is widely regarded as an earlier incarnation of the Panchen Lama, and Domdumba is widely regarded, kind of universally, as an earlier incarnation of the Dalai Lama. So this is the Panchen Lama, Dalai Lama. In that particular incarnation, Atisha is Domdumba's disciple. Fast forward a few centuries, and you have the great fifth Dalai Lama, the great fifth, and his tutor was a later incarnation of Atisha. So once again, Atisha was his disciple, but then later on, then they flip roles, and now the disciple becomes the teacher becomes a disciple. And this goes all, for those who have, open to this, it goes all the way back to Shambhala. And the first of the 25 Kalki kings of Shambhala, a realm that I'm actually completely convinced is real, but kind of on a different plane of existence than our familiar world here. The first of these 25 kings of Shambhala was an incarnation of the Panchen Lama, and its successor was an incarnation of Dalai Lama. So it's quite an interesting pattern that continues up until recent times. So I think without further ado, what I'd like to do first is go directly into meditation. So each session we'll have a time for meditation, and I'll talk just a tiny bit about it first. So please find a comfortable position. I see some of you have laid out yoga mats, perfectly welcome at any time. Meditating in the supine position is fine. I would be very content if you're all comfortable during our meditation sessions, which will be relatively short. But what I'll share with you now is something that is an exercise, if you like, or a training that I think really is an invaluable prelude to any type of meditation at all, whether you're Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, a prelude to any type of meditation, but also more broadly speaking, for any type of worthy endeavor, writing a business plan, doing some scientific research, teaching a class in a school, and so on. For any kind of meaningful endeavor, including having times with one's children or spouse, having really meaningful conversation and so forth, they can all be enhanced, made more valuable, more meaningful by, first of all, balancing our body, speech, and mind before we enter into the main event, the main activity. And so this is going to be a short practice. I think maybe we'll make 20 minutes of this. And it's called settling in body, speech, and mind in the natural state. And I'll let the practice speak for itself. This is not stress reduction. And there are many ways of reducing stress. And of course, whenever we can reduce stress, we're happy for that. But as they say, the best medicine is preventative medicine and not waiting for the disease to have already struck. And I think the best antidote to stress is preventing it from taking place in the first place. So you don't have to keep on cleaning up afterwards. As I would say, when I'm about to say this next sentence is something I feel deeply confident about. Stress is not something that happens to us. Is not directly correlated with how busy we are, or the weather, or how other people behave, or anything external. I know this because some of my lamas have spent years and years in concentration camps. That would be considered one of the most stressful environments one can possibly be in, right? And yet they weren't stressed. Garchen Rinpoche, a Mahamudra master, Yangchen Rinpoche, a Dzogchen master, Khenpo Minsel, another Dzogchen master. All of these have spent many years, 18, 20 years, in Chinese concentration camps. And what did these three masters do? They turned it into a retreat. Khenpo Minsel took his other inmates, other monks, tulkus and so forth, and they just turned that time into a Dzogchen retreat. So what would have been for almost anyone an absolutely debilitatingly stressful situation, to put it mildly, they took the external circumstances, which were brutal, and they transformed them in Dharma, and then that just turned into a retreat. So I know a lot about their experiences from detailed commentaries they've given to me. Paulin Gatso was one, spent 30 years in concentration camp. He told me what it was like. I will not narrate, but it's some of the most stressful situation you could ever find yourself in. And yet, weathering that storm. And so stress isn't something that happens to us. It's not related to how much we're working and so forth. Stress is something we're bringing to a situation, a relationship, work, an environment, whatever. And so how can we prevent the stress from arising? Well, that's what this practice is for. So I will set my timer here for 20 minutes and we'll jump right in. We begin this practice by, first of all, relaxing. Feel your shoulders drop, your face relax. And let your awareness, which you may feel is normally located up in your head, maybe behind your eyes, let your awareness descend down into the torso. Bring your awareness down all the way to the ground where your body is in contact with the floor, the chair, or cushion, or yoga mat. And quietly, simply be present with the tactile sensations of your body in contact with what supports it, the floor, and so on. The sensations you're feeling are called the sensations of the earth element, of firmness, solidity. It supports you. Without thinking about them or projecting anything upon them, just be present with this flow of tactile sensations arising in the contact of your body with what supports it. And then like a fragrance filling a room, let your awareness fill the entire somatic field of your body, from the soles of your feet to the crown of your head, and be mindfully present throughout the whole of this tactile field. Without visualizing the body or thinking anything about it, simply, nakedly, be aware of these tactile sensations throughout this three-dimensional field. Release any thought of the body and simply be present. With this effervescent flow or field of sensations arising from moment to moment. Especially with every out-breath, relax your body, release tension more and more deeply with each exhalation, softening the muscles of the face, the muscles around the mouth, the jaws, muscles in your forehead and around your eyes. And soften your eyes themselves. Set your whole body at ease, relaxed and comfortable. And within the field of relaxation, let your body be still, not engaging in any unnecessary movements. And whether you're sitting cross-legged or on a chair, assume a posture of vigilance. Even in the supine position, let your spine be straight. If you're sitting up, slightly elevate your chest. Loosen the muscles of the abdomen so that as each breath flows in, you feel your belly expand and retract as you breathe out. In this way, settle your body in its natural state, a state of dynamic equilibrium in which your body is relaxed, still, and vigilant. And then we turn to a subtler balancing act, and that is one of settling the respiration in its natural rhythm. Its natural rhythm is not any one set rhythm, but rather allowing your body to breathe effortlessly and unimpededly. Aware of the tactile sensations throughout your body that are correlated with the movements of the in and out breath. And again, with every exhalation, take this as an opportunity or an invitation to relax more and more deeply in the body, releasing tension, releasing the breath all the way through to the end, holding nothing in reserve. And with each exhalation, release any thoughts, memories, mental images that may have come up spontaneously, as if they're blown away into the sky by a gentle gust of breeze. Simply release the activities of the mind with every exhalation. Allow the body to breathe naturally, effortlessly, as if you were deep asleep. The time of the most restorative, rejuvenating, revitalizing respirational experience in a 24-hour period. Take advantage of such breathing now, relinquishing all control, any impulse to regulate or modify the breathing, and let the body breathe without any interference from you. With every exhalation, you're allowing the inner voice of the mind, the chit-chat, rumination, the internal commentary, to settle in its natural state of effortless silence. With every exhalation, gently, soothingly, returning to the silence of the mind. And then finally, we turn to the subtlest challenge in this practice. And that is settling the mind in its natural state. And for this, we need a technique. And the technique begins with simply being explicitly aware of the fact that you are indeed aware. You are conscious. Explicitly be aware of being aware. There's a constant flow here, the flow of mental awareness that is by nature illuminating. It makes manifest all kinds of experiences, sensory and mental. It is a luminous flow. And it is a cognizant flow, a flow of knowing. It's simple. Like distilled water, free of flavoring or contamination. Rest in that flow of self-knowing, self-illuminating awareness. Before I referred to such self-knowing awareness, the awareness of being aware, you already were. And so that kind of awareness is in fact effortless. Rest in that effortless flow of awareness of awareness. And when we release all grasping to or appropriation of the movements of the mind, in other words, thoughts arise, but we're not thinking. Memories arise, but we're simply aware of the memories arising in the present moment. Images arise in the mind, but our attention is not drawn to the referent of the image, but rather to that mental event itself, mental image. When we rest in awareness, free of such grasping, resting in a mode of witnessing, we see that awareness by nature is still. It's only when it catches a ride on the movements of the mind that it's set in motion. So with your awareness utterly loose, relaxed, as free as possible from grasping and clinging, rest in the natural stillness of awareness. Unmoved by sounds, tactile sensations, visual impressions. Naturally still. To rest your awareness in a mode of relaxation, of ease, of stillness, and then finally awareness is by nature clear, bright, luminous. Rest in that natural clarity of awareness. By resting in that way, with your awareness relaxed, still and clear, fully present with whatever arises in the space of the mind, memories, thoughts, images, desires, emotions, and so on. Be fully present with, cognizant of whatever arises in the space of the mind, but without merging with it. Simply recognizing these as mental events while observing them from the stillness of your awareness. So in short, you're resting in the stillness of awareness, in the face of the movements of the mind. And you've taken your first step on this path when you're clearly able to distinguish between the natural stillness of awareness and the ongoing movements, fluctuations arising and passing of mental events. In this way, we're becoming lucid with respect to the mind, not caught up in the activities of the mind as in a non-lucid dream, carried away by our thoughts, memories, and so on, but rather fully cognizant of mental events as mental events, just as we are in a lucid dream. And in this way, by being present with the mind, witnessing the movements of the mind, in this way, we allow the mind to settle in its own natural state, calming, becoming more at ease, approaching stillness, and saturated by the clarity, the vividness of awareness itself. In this way, we settle the mind in its natural state, a state of dynamic equilibrium. So, So now we metaphorically step into our time machine like flies on the wall in this room, presumably it's inside, who knows, between Atisha and Domdumba, listening in, listening in. Now, this conversation was written down by a disciple of Domdumba, so I'm assuming that he had something pretty close to an eidetic memory, because this conversation goes on for 8 pages, and he didn't miss a beat, I'm presuming. So let's listen in on this brilliant disciple, the foremost of all of Atisha's disciples in Tibet, and this man who may very well have been the most renowned, most accomplished Bodhisattva Pandit Siddha in India at that time, who came from this very high culture, very high civilization of India at that time in the 11th century, in which there was already established, well established, a whole network of universities all over India. The earliest one going back, Takashila, going back to prior to the time of the Buddha. And so that first millennium of the Common Era, there were many, many universities, some Jaina, Brahmanic, Theravada Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhist, and so forth. They were not seminaries, they're not monasteries, they're not theological seminaries, they were universities. In Nalanda, that may be the crown jewel of all of them, which flourished for 700 years and then was destroyed in the very early 13th century, as I recall. There were 5 major topics, 5 secondary topics, and the principle of the 5 topics to be studied in this university was the mind. It was the mind. That was primary. What are the true causes of suffering? What are the true causes of general well-being? What are the origins of the mind? What's the nature of the mind? How does the mind interface with the body? What happens at death? What are the potentials of the mind? Those questions that I just posed, virtually all of them remain entirely unanswered in the 21st century in modern science. This hasn't been our fort. This hasn't been the strength of Western science. Galileo, the founder, physics is a strength, biology is a strength, chemistry is a strength, without parallel. But when it comes to the mind, these great Indian scholars and contemplatives, such as Atisha, they knew the appropriate technology. As Galileo identified the appropriate technology for studying celestial phenomena, sun, moon, planets, and stars, you got it right. And we go from his 30-power telescope up to the James Webb Space Telescope. And how much have we learned about the universe because we found the appropriate technology? And I'll just say right up front, again, with a lot of confidence, the appropriate technology for fathoming the nature of the mind, its origin, nature, potentials, and so on, which is invisible to all instruments of technology and does not lend itself to quantitative analysis, which is not objective, not physical, not quantifiable, which is the domain in which modern science is a terrific success story. But the mind isn't any of those 3. So how can one make rigorous, replicable, sophisticated, precise observations and run experiments on the mind with instruments for which it's invisible, and you can't even define it? They haven't defined it so far. They've had 150 years of chance to define consciousness. They haven't come up with it yet. So the appropriate technology, and I think it's a powerful parallel, for fathoming the mind is using the instrument, the technology of samadhi. And that's what we'll be seeing, exploring over these 5 days. So let's plunge in. But Atisha was a classic student of the great university system of India at that time. He trained in Nalanda, he trained in Vikramashila, he trained in multiple monastic universities. And there weren't just lay people, just monastics studied there, lay people also. But then there was some knowledge he wanted that he didn't find satisfactory education in India. And he went off and spent 11 years in Indonesia, training under a great master there. Transmissions, teachings, insight that he alone perhaps could have been unique. 11 years there, then came back to India. But it was like he did his undergraduate here and his master's there and his doctorate there and a postdoctorate there. And then with all of these laurels, all of his accolades, his eminence, then he was invited to the outback. The outback of Asia was Tibet. It's no man's land, you know. It was far removed from the high civilization of 11th century India, which was, one could say, at its zenith back then, before crushed by, frankly, barbarians from the West. And so at a time when we are still in the Dark Ages in Europe, that's when India was perhaps at its apex. And so now let's get on with it. Let's turn in, let's listen with our ears to the wall, any metaphor you like. And so in a whole series of teaching, this is chapter 14 in a book that Thupten Jinpa has translated the whole book, including this one. But I just felt moved, inspired to make my own translation. And I did it with a close colleague and very respected spiritual friend and student of mine, Ivan Netanya. So you're getting the fruits of labors of Thupten Jinpa's input and Ivan Netanya's, and then I have to take responsibility because I was making the most recent polishing. I thought it was polishing. I hope it didn't make it worse. So we jump right in. So once again here, the 14th of chapter in this series, once again at that very same place and in the presence of the Guru, endowed with such sublime qualities, and that's Atisha, my own Guru, Dom Gyalwe Jungne, the full name of Dom Dumba, said to Atisha. So we have the student of Dom Dumba writing this down. He received it, Dom Dumba, and here's the conversation. And it begins with a question posed by Dom Dumba to Atisha. Please listen, O wise one. We sentient beings of Tibet need to be tamed. Now bear in mind at this time, almost exactly 1,000 years ago, early 11th century, Tibet had just been through a very grim, dark age of its own. There was a flourishing in the 8th century with King Tisun Densen and Shanti Rakshita and Padmasambhava, and a tremendous flowering that went on for some generations, and then a crushing of Buddhist institutions, tradition, and so forth in Tibet, almost wiped it out. And also a great diminution of the great empire of Songtsen Gampo and Tisun Densen. So they really went through a dark age. And there was a lot of contamination, corruption of Buddha Dharma. And so then, now this is during the time with Rinchen Zambo and others who are revitalizing it, and Atisha was a key player here. But Dom Dumba, he's not exaggerating when he said, we are people who need to be tamed. We're a rough country. We're not very civilized, very cultured, and we need to be we need to be tamed. So he continues now in that regard. Tibet's own language is a very dim-witted language, a crude language for leading one to the path. They had a written language because a couple of centuries earlier, one was created at the time of Songtsen Gampo. And a lot of words had been coined, but again, there was this great collapse or corruption. And so the colloquial language was really not one that was very fitting for the extremely sophisticated terminology, language of Sanskrit. And so they had to make up a whole bunch of terms that simply were nowhere to be found in Tibetan. Our English language is one of the richest of all the European languages. It's been eclectic, drawn from the Germanic language, drawn from the Romance language, and so forth. So it is exceptionally rich. But even with all the richness of the English language, we translators, and I've been translating now for about more than 45 years, we've had to make up a whole bunch of terms that you just don't find in English, like the word dharma, for example. That's kind of, you don't translate it as religion, it's a bad translation. And klesha, we had to make up a term, and often it's mistranslated by people who have not studied Western psychology or Buddhist psychology sufficiently and calling it destructive emotions. Well, yeah, we have destructive emotions, but most kleshas are not emotions. Whoops. And so as for the Tibetans, 1,000 years ago, to some degree, we Aussies, we Kiwis, we Yanks, and so forth, contemplatively speaking, we're quite primitive. Quite primitive. In other ways, very advanced. Contemplatively, not so much. And so we have a dull-witted, dim-witted language for leading to the past. So the time has come for me to appeal to you to use words whose meanings are comprehended the moment one hears them. To make it right to the point, right? What is the root of all suffering? That's his first question. What's the root of all suffering? As with a plant, we know there are many, many contributing circumstances that can make the plant grow well or get sick or simply die. But many, many from the environment, the air, the soil, having too little, too much water, we know that. And likewise, there are many, many things, countless things, innumerable circumstances that can make someone unhappy. Why are you unhappy? And then the finger goes out. And it can go out in any direction, like one of those sprinklers that goes about 360 degrees. Why am I happy? Why am I happy? Why am I depressed? Why am I anxious, disturbed? And then and that's why I'm unhappy. And so for me to be happy, you're gonna have to fix all of that. Good luck with that. You're gonna have to fix your neighbors. On occasion, you might have to fix your spouse. Definitely have to fix your kids. And fix your boss, and fix society, and fix Ukraine, and fix the problems in Australia. And so if we have to wait until the world is fixed before we can be happy and not disturbed by what's happening in the world, we're going to have a very, very long wait, because the world's beyond our control. Our health is beyond our control. I'm sure a number of you got COVID. Was there a day when you decided, gosh, COVID sounds pretty interesting, I might give it a try? Did you do it voluntarily? I don't think so. And so even our health, to a large degree, beyond our control. So if you were to ask Atisha, great Atisha, oh wise one, tell me the things that make people unhappy, that would be an endless discourse. It would never stop. That's like asking how many leaves there are on this tree. Well, they keep on growing new leaves. But if you ask what's the root of the tree, and if you could sever the root of this toxic, poisonous tree, then you don't need to snip off all the leaves and branches. You just cut the taproot, and then the toxic tree is up. It's finished, right? He's asking, let's get real. In the same situation, a concentration camp or a vacation or the economy going well or poorly, some people become very unhappy and others don't. There's no homogeneity there. And so what's the root? He's asking why fundamentally are we vulnerable to suffering? Now, physically, it's pretty straightforward. We don't even have the skin of a rhinoceros or an alligator. We've got very wimpy skin, about 1/16 of an inch, I understand. That makes us vulnerable even for me last night. These tiny little critters, what are they called? Aussie mozzies? They gave me a visit last night. And so I see, wow, that's how vulnerable I am. This little tiny critter with a, spiked nose, he can keep me awake, and have a little come in for a snack. And so that's how much defense mechanism I have. A mosquito breaks through all the barriers and gets what he wants, right? And so physically, well, that's kind of obvious. We don't need any answer to that. We already have them. Sickness and injury, aging, death, that's easy. That's in a way straightforward within this lifetime. But when the mind is invisible, you can't see anybody else's mind. You can see your own, but not anybody else's. How can anybody else hurt our feelings when they don't even know where they are or whether we have any? And how can other people make us depressed or anxious or sad or depressed? How is that possible when they can't even see the target? How is that possible? But it seems to be, right? And so why are we fundamentally vulnerable to suffering, especially mental suffering? Please give us a snappy answer, make it right to the point that we can understand immediately. And so what is the root of all suffering? And Atisha replied, "Rom, it is misconduct." Other translators and I have struggled with this translation for a long, long time. It's dikpa in Tibetan. If we didn't have any defense mechanisms against Christianity or Judaism, we would very straightforwardly translate it as sin. Sin would be perfectly translation, but it comes with an awful lot of baggage because Buddhism is not Christianity. It didn't borrow from Christianity. Can't quite use that one. And so I won't give you the whole roster of possible translations. This one, at least, it's a bit wimpy. It doesn't have a bunch of juice to it, like sin has a lot of juice to it. Misconduct, that's like talking with your mouth full, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of juice, but at least it's accurate. But now let's pause right here. It's going to be hard for me to move quickly through this because I would like it to be crystal clear. The term can be translated as evil, as vice, as sin, unwholesome, non-virtuous activity, and so forth. But how, if he said this is the root of all suffering, then we should be able to recognize it when we see it. It's not just any kind of misconduct. If I come over here from America and I just do the natural thing, I drive on the right side of the road, not the left side, but on the right side. Because we broke away, Americans, we broke away from the Brits. That would be misconduct in Australia, right? You're driving on the wrong side of the road, mate. Get real. And if you get into the car, get on the left side, I was just told this morning. Oh yeah. That's misconduct, but that's not a non-virtue. That's not going to have negative consequences in future lifetimes, right? So precisely what is meant here by non-virtuous, evil, vicious, sinful behavior? How do we distinguish between misconduct and virtuous conduct, between virtue and non-virtue? I'll try to cut right to it. If one has very deep faith, confidence, trust, hopefully very well earned in the Buddha, and in his direct knowledge of actions committed in one lifetime having consequences in another, then you can simply read the book. He spoke extensively about karma, actions, and their consequences from lifetime to lifetime. So he can tell you, this action here is called non-virtuous because of the fully ripening effects manifesting in the next lifetime or 50 lifetimes later. And therefore, because the results are toxic, therefore we say that deed is non-virtuous. Not because the Buddha said so, but because of the long-term consequences. But then if one doesn't have all that much confidence in the Buddha's teaching and the karma, think, oh, this is religion, but the Muslims have another system and the Christians have another, and so forth. And you say, well, then, how do we know whether that's true? If one doesn't have that kind of confidence, then the Dalai Lama has written 2 books on the topic of ethics for the new millennium, another one beyond religion, because he's aware that all 8 billion of us, we just hit that number recently, all 8 billion of us human beings on the planet, if we don't live ethically, then our civilization is doomed. But not everybody believes in God, heaven and hell, karma, and so forth. So for all the people who don't believe in that, but do believe in something else, like death means termination, obliteration, that is a belief as much as believing in God or karma. Is not supported by scientific evidence. That's part of the false marketing that's gone out. As if scientists know what happens at death. They're clueless. That's a fact. Because they don't have a clue what are the necessary and sufficient causes for the emergence of consciousness, either in a human fetus or in the first origin of conscious life on the planet. They don't have a clue. That's simply a fact. Not putting them down. It's just saying what's true. And if you don't know what causes something, you also don't know what terminates it. So it's not exactly breaking news that the brain goes dead when you die. Well, we already knew that. What happens to consciousness? Don't have a clue. So we're all believers here, except for the knowers, and I'm persuaded there are knowers, and these are highly advanced contemplatives, Buddhist, Hindu, early Christian, Taoists, and so forth, who've actually fathomed where does the mind come from and what happens at death. But the rest, everybody else is believer. Equally a believer in materialism as in Buddhism or Christianity. We're all equally believers, except for those who know. And I do believe there are those who know. So let's now just bring this in the context of this life. Can we do that? Can we have some clear criteria by which to determine, is my speech right now, is this virtuous or non-virtuous? Wholesome or unwholesome? Is it misconduct? And with physical behavior, verbal behavior, and then mental behavior, every time there's an intention, that's an act. Experiencing a mental affliction or experiencing this or that, that's not an act. It's like witnessing a crime scene. That doesn't make you an accomplice. You simply witnessed maybe something really terrible, but you didn't do it. You're not responsible. So simply witnessing catastrophes in the mind, like hatred and so forth and so on. Simply witnessing that doesn't make you an accomplice. It's not an action simply to witness. But as soon as you appropriate, identify with, and then run with it, okay, that's an action. So try this on for size. You see how quickly we're making progress with the conversation. Okay, shall we just speak quite faster? Maybe not. How about this? If we can experientially and intellectually, theoretically, conceptually, draw a clear and sharp distinction between 2 types of happiness or well-being, that may provide us with a clear and really quite robust criterion for determining, is this action wholesome or unwholesome? And that is a distinction that's been drawn by Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, by Zhuangzi, by the Buddha, by St. Augustine. I found it in the Jewish tradition. I found it in the Muslim tradition. I found it in multiple philosophies. And we also find this now, over the last 22 years or so, in modern psychology with the advent of positive psychology. So now this distinction, the Greeks called it eudaimonia, genuine well-being, versus hedonia, stimulus-driven, mundane pleasures. It crops up in all the world's religions. I checked. Not always identical. How could it be identical? But the theme, definitely there. And we find it in multiple philosophies. And now we find it fairly recently in psychology. There's genuine happiness, authentic happiness. That's now a meaningful term in positive psychology. And then there's the other kind of pleasure, right? Now, the other kind of pleasure, I call it hedonia, not because it's hedonistic, as in crude, vulgar, or you drink a lot, you carouse, you like gambling, not that. That's very crude, of course. But by hedonia, I mean, I'm referring to any type of sensory-driven, sensory-stimulated kind of pleasure. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm enjoying being with you right now. So insofar as I'm speaking with, engaging with people who are attentive and engaged, I enjoy it. If you're all falling asleep right now, I'd be a little bit discouraged. You know? So so this is hedonia, my enjoying being with you and enjoying the pleasant weather today. There's nothing crude or vulgar about it. And so we can enjoy something very refreshing to drink, a good meal, some pleasant music, a lovely breeze, a lovely conversation with a friend, a very meaningful relationship with a spouse, a loving relationship with one's children, enjoying one's work, enjoying vacations, holidays, enjoying a good movie on occasion, and so on. We see none of those are vulgar and crude and just, for the lower people. Hedonia is having enough to eat, having clothing, having shelter, having medical care when you need it. And now in the modern world, having education without which it's hard to make a living. All those are hedonia. So sure, there's very hedonistic, crude, and vulgar, but there's also really very fine hedonia. But it's all stimulus-driven. And when the stimulus is withdrawn, the pleasure vanishes. Leaves you with a memory, and then not even that. So that is not sustainable. No type of hedonia is sustainable. You can't count on that stimulation coming in, and it's not always coming in through by way of the five physical senses. It can also be the hedonia you experience by drinking alcohol, or some people feel less stress when they smoke tobacco, or then the psychotropic drugs and also other kinds of drugs. So you can arouse hedonia also by stimulating, chemically stimulating your brain, but it's not sustainable. I don't know any drug that makes you more ethical. If it were, I might take it myself. Nothing sustainable. All kinds of drugs. And they give you this kind of high and this kind of amazing experience and yada, 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 and they're not sustainable. So that's the nature of hedonia. And hedonia by nature tends to be what we can get from the world. And we get it by pursuing it. But in pursuing it, it's by nature winds up being competitive. If I have more, somebody else less. If one country has more, another has less. And it's for tangible things like material resources, but it's also things like prestige. If one person has greater prestige, greater celebrity status, somebody else has less. If somebody has greater power, influence, authority, somebody else has less. So when two countries, two individuals, two communities are both going outwards to find hedonia, there's going to be a clash of interest. And then you look out. Then there's bound to be conflict sooner or later. Eudaimonia, a quality of well-being that you cannot pursue, you cannot acquire, but you can cultivate by your way of life, your way of speaking, your physical activities, and above all, cultivating the mind. As a farmer cultivates a field, you can cultivate genuine well-being. And therefore, it's not competitive. Because if I or His Holiness Dalai Lama has greater eudaimonia, and he's topping the charts in eudaimonia, nobody else has any less. So that distinction, a quality of happiness, well-being that is cultivated and is sustainable, and another quality of happiness that may be very vulgar or may be quite sophisticated, enjoying a beautiful symphony, for example, or very fine art and so on, or enjoying the beauties of nature. That's not competitive, but it is hedonic, because when you're out of nature and back, back in your workplace, it's gone. That distinction, I am totally persuaded that young children can recognize this from that. The joy of giving versus the joy of receiving. 5-year-old can understand that. So I could linger and spend the rest of the hour on that topic, but I want to just try to get clarity in this context of this lifetime that we all believe in. And I'm going to make this statement, this criterion. Any type of activity of body, speech, and mind that is conducive to our own and or others' genuine well-being, eudaimonia, supports it, sustains it, nurtures it, that's virtuous. And any type of behavior, body, speech, or mind that undermines, destroys, crushes our own and or others' genuine well-being, that's misconduct. It's ethical misconduct, not just what some law or some government says. Now that we can determine in this lifetime, but that requires ethical intelligence, really refining, observing the consequences of our behavior. We may have meant well, it may wind up being catastrophic. And so that was a long commentary, but if we can have clarity there, misconduct, sin, whatever you want to call it, is the root of suffering, then we need to have that sharply in focus and not just, being bad. Because virtually every person who does something bad, including horrendously bad, finds a way to justify it. Find it. The serial killer, the mass murderer, and so forth and so on. Ask them, why did you do that? And they said, well, here's the reason. It was justified. It was justified. I don't regret it. If you want to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. We have to have a pure race. We have to, it was needed. I know it's unpleasant, but it was justified. We have to do that. So when you think of the greatest atrocities that human beings have committed over recorded history, they always had a justification. They say, I know it looks bad, but in fact, it's necessary. So then we need something more than that. How does it feel? So gosh, let's see if we can make it through at least one paragraph. So it is misconduct. It is conduct, body, speech, and mind that undermines our own and others' genuine well-being. Master, what's the root of misconduct? Where does that come from? And rather than going into a mythical story, he brings it right back to the present moment, but in a statement very short here that's not self-explanatory. It's the aggregates, the I or self. Not self-explanatory. To you good Buddhist scholars, then you'll read that, you'll be completely transparent. But it's not obvious. What are the aggregates? The aggregates are 5, but let's make it simple, the body and mind. The body and mind, what's the root of misconduct, body and mind? Well, does that mean as long as we have a body and mind that we're going to do terrible things? No, that's not the meaning. It's not the meaning. To say the aggregates themselves are, well, it needs a bit of commentary. And I'm not making this up. I'll speak from the teachings I've received over the last 52 years. It's called the closely held aggregates, the appropriated aggregates. This body, if I have checked it through conceptually, the cells and all the brain cells and so forth, look through it, and there's not one cell, not one molecule, not one body part that actually belongs to me. My parents' egg and sperm didn't belong to me. All the nutrients that came in that, helped that generate into a body, none of those belong to me. The body, and no part of the body has ever belonged to me. Here it is. Nobody else is claiming it, especially a 72-year-old claim, oh yeah, I want one of those. 72-year-old body, find a younger one, definitely. But nobody else wants my body, so it's kind of like, well, here's a good example. The hermit crab, when it's born without a shell. It's like a bardo being traveling through the bardo, not having a shell, not having a body. And the bardo being is desperately in search of a body and finds one. Plato commented on the same point, and it runs through all of Buddhism, that when we come into this life, we're coming in without a body, and we don't have a mind, as in human mind, bovine mind, canine mind. We just have this stream of consciousness. It's a subtle mind. And so then we appropriate a body that wasn't ours. It's like the hermit crab born with no shell, finding some empty shell and moving right in and then saying mine. But it wasn't its before he moved in. After he's moved in, he's basically a squatter. He didn't get, ownership just by moving in. And then sooner or later, he's going to die. It's going to be an empty shell again. And probably some other hermit crab will say, oh, good, vacancy. But the shell doesn't belong to the crab. The crab just appropriated it. All of you are squatters. I'm a squatter. Who gave you the right to appropriate the bodies that you're inhabiting and think, I own it, this is me, this is mine. It's not even yours, let alone is it you. You've just moved in. And the mind that arises in dependence upon this body is a human mind because you have a human nervous system and human brain. You didn't bring a human mind with you, and you won't leave with your human mind either. No carry-on luggage when you leave. No carry-on luggage at all. You just hop on the plane and you're gone into the bardo. And so why does he say the aggregates are the root of misconduct? Because we've appropriated them, the appropriated aggregates. This is my body. These are my mind, my emotions, my memory, my personality, my mind, none of which are actually mine, but collapsing awareness, which by nature is spacious without boundaries. By appropriating, identifying with, and collapsing into, I'm over here, I'm not over there. This is my body, not that body. These are my emotions, not yours. Then I've isolated myself, I've cordoned myself off because I've closely appropriated, taken charge of, and claimed ownership of this body and this mind, neither of which are mine. But as soon as I've done that, I'm vulnerable. I'm vulnerable to a single mosquito. I'm vulnerable to all kinds of mental distress catalyzed by the environment. It's because we've appropriated, collapsed our awareness down to this very small time and space of my body and my mind that I'm vulnerable. Now you can hurt my body because I've appropriated it. Now you can hurt my feelings because I've appropriated them. And now you can make me feel really bad about myself because I've identified with these emotions and so forth. But if we never identified with the body and mind, we would not be vulnerable in that way. And how is it that we appropriate? He said the root of misconduct is the I, the sense of I. Again, if it were simply the root, then you could have no sense of I, and only then could be free of suffering and misconduct. That's not what he means. So we have to be very careful that these are two very, very knowledgeable, sophisticated people talking, so they're not going to be making misinterpretations. The I or self used synonymously. It's that grasping to the self of I'm over here. I'm localized. I'm not over there. This is me. This is my body and this is my mind and these are my emotions. These are my activities. This is my history and this is my personality. And I'm over here and I'm really here. I'm the owner and operator of Alan Wallace Incorporated. And not you. You're over there, way over. You look at all the empty space. In fact, there's no relationship at all between us. You're way over there. I don't see any mingling of your presence over there and me. I'm way over here. And so now I have alienated myself from everyone else in the universe because I'm totally, really, truly, autonomously here. And that's who I am. And I want to become all that I can be. Or I get really depressed. Oh, I wish I could just disappear. So the craving for becoming, the craving for annihilation, we tend to be both. I want to live a long life. Oh no, I can't stand living. I want to check out. I want to be all that I can be. Oh no, I want to be invisible. I'm so shy. But all rooted in I am, reified, autonomous, substantial, and the controller. I'm not just speaking random sounds here. I am speaking and I'm responsible for every word I say. The agent, I'm an autonomous agent, influenced, but I'm over here. And then questions come up, do I have free will? That's assuming you really exist in the first place. Maybe you should back up with that question. Are you really there at all? And do you really have anything at all, let alone free will? Do you even have a thought? Or is the thought simply an event for which you have an exclusive viewing, like your own private cinema? So it's good to be very clear. He said, make it clear. Well, these are two very savvy people here. I'm trying to make it clear. It's the aggregates, the I or the self. Master, now, how does the I or self act as the root of misconduct? How does it happen? And don't, because it wants everything. The I, the self, it wants everything. Well, Master, how does it want everything? And the teacher replied, it wants others to be, it wants oneself to be above and others to be beneath. We've isolated ourselves, identified ourselves. I'm over here. This is my body. I say, hand go up, hand go down. It does it. I know who's in charge. Hand up, down. It does it. So some things I can control. I can focus my attention. Attention says, where do you want to go? Go there. There it goes. And so that sense of I'm really here already. And I'm different from everybody else, radically, ontologically, truly different from everybody else. And I want to feel good about myself. But no man is an island, as the old aphorism goes. I want to feel good about myself relative to other people. And other people don't look all that great to me. And so I'd like to be better than them. In fact, I think I am better than them. And I want all the good stuff to come to me. And the leftovers, the stuff I don't really care about, well, everybody else can have that. So I want to be above. I want to have more wealth. I want to have more power. I want to be better known, respected, loved, admired. I want it all. I want it all. Now, some of the people who are most transparent in that are some politicians that may come to mind. My country is number one. I want to be number one within the country because I am number one, because after all, I'm the best. And it's not just one man that says that. Tyrants have been saying that for as long as there have been tyrants. And tyrants of companies, of countries, of families, of communities. I want everything good for myself. And I want to be, everybody know I'm better than they are. There's a little problem with that, and you may hold that view if you like, but you'll find that virtually no one around you agrees. And that creates some conflict. So how does it want? It wants to be above, oneself to be above and others to be beneath. Well, that attitude, I want to be above. I want everybody to be inferior to me, know that they're inferior to me. What's that called? What is that called? In Dom, it's called that which is imbued with self-attachment and hatred. So there's, first of all, the ignorance of not knowing who we are. I know what my body is, that's right here. I know what my mind is, yeah, that thought, that emotion, got that. But who's the owner and proprietor? Who's in charge here? Well, I direct my mind at will, and I do things with my body that I want it to do. What's the referent of the word I? If you ask cell phone, I can point right to it. There's a cell phone. There's there it is, a mobile. But exactly what do I point to when I want to know the referent of the word I? And whatever I point to isn't it. It's not hair on the side of my head, not my brain. A brain is not a person. That's a ridiculous notion. It's gotten very widespread marketing, but there's no truth to it. What part of the brain? The frontal cortex, hippocampus, amygdala? It's a silly idea, but materialists like it. I guess make them happy. And so there's no part of the body that is I. No thought, emotion, memory is me. It's not a person. And so then not knowing, but then who I am, when I say me or I say my name, what's the referent to the term? And not knowing who I am. That's the first aphorism we have in Western civilization, the Delphic oracle, know thyself. Socrates knew it, and he said, I still don't know myself. One of the wisest men of his generation or of his whole era. So in that fertile ground of not knowing who we are, in the fertile ground of ignorance, of unknowing, not knowing, grows the toxic plant of delusion, and that's getting it wrong. If you don't know who you are, then if you don't know what to stand for, then you'll fall for anything, as the old aphorism goes. If you don't know who you are, then you'll just identify with something you're not, like your body, like your personality, your thoughts, your emotions, memories, and so on. And now you have delusion, thinking you know who you are, but you're not. And that's going to get you in a lot of problems because you're now at variance with reality. That's not true. You're acting as if it were true. And then you succumb to this self-centered attachment. And that is, we're not only cognizant, but we want to be happy and free of suffering. But if I'm autonomous, I'm really over here, then I want all the happiness to come my way. I should be first in line. If happiness or wealth or prestige, admiration, I should get the first serving. Whatever's left over after I've dined as much as I want. Other people can have what I don't want, but I should have the happiness. I should be famous. I should be self-centered attachment. But then, of course, when I don't get it, and somebody else has more than I, then I feel very uncomfortable. I feel anger, hatred, aversion, resentment. I didn't get my share. You got more than you deserve. I should have had that. So in the self-centered attachment and the hatred, when it doesn't go our way, then out of that comes this hybrid, this weird mental affliction called envy. Envy. And that is, you're more famous than I, you're more handsome, you're more renowned, you're wealthier, greater power, you're bigger success than I am, and I can't stand it. You don't deserve it. You shouldn't have that. I should have that. So it's simultaneously trying to go backwards and forwards at the same time. I can't stand it that you have it. That's aversion, but I should have it, and that's attachment. And so it's like hitting the brake and the accelerator at the same time. And it really doesn't work out well. It's not good for your engine or your brakes. Envy is really a ridiculous mental affliction because it doesn't get the job done. If I'm just sitting here jealous of somebody, envious of them, what am I accomplishing? Am I more successful, smarter, more learned? No, I'm just creating a lot of bad air. And so out of the confluence of self-centered attachment and then aversion, hostility, comes the fifth of the 5 poisons. And that's what Atish is referring to in this very simple response. Ignorance, delusion is primary. Out of that comes self-centered attachment. Out of that comes aversion towards others when they have something I want or get in the way of something I have or want. And then out of those 4, there comes pride. Out of the attachment to self comes pride. And what is pride? He's going to mention that very soon, so we'll get to that. And then envy. So he's covering 5 poisons here that are really at the root of suffering and the root of misconduct. And so what's that called? Well, it's called being imbued with selfish attachment and hatred. Master, in whom is this most prevalent? He's like a visitor from some other planet that doesn't know about these kind of things. Like, oh, I've heard about this self-centered attachment, and yeah, who has that? Who's prone to that? You know. And so Atisha humors him, and he says, well, it's most prevalent in those with little spiritual practice, but with great pride. So their spiritual practice, if they have one at all, is basically just lip service. And pride, here's another term, it's very specific. Buddhist terminology, when it comes to mind, tends to be very, very crystal clear, razor sharp. What is pride? And pride as a mental affliction, pride as one of the 5 poisons, is the sense of being better than others. Na gyal, I win. That's a Tibetan term. I win. I'm better. I win. We contested. I came out on top. It's a sense of being superior. Not just, for example, one could be proud of being taller than other people. I'm taller than some other people. And if you think height is a virtue, then well, I'm better than shorter people. But that's silly. My body is just taller, right? And some people are more intelligent, some more creative, some more affectionate, some people, and some more skilled, gifted in engineering, and others in art, and others. So people vary an awful lot. And in terms of qualities that we value, clearly some people are more gifted than others. And some are better trained, maybe not so gifted, but they go through tremendous education and they develop skills, qualities, virtues they didn't have before. So it's quite obvious that not all people are created equal, and having education and life experience, we wind up being unequal in many, many ways. And that's just a fact. That's just a fact. Some people better at languages, some not so much. But simply acknowledging that one has certain gifts that are superior to other people's gifts in a certain way, more talented in music and so on, that's just being realistic. But then conflating your skill, something you regard as a virtue, like being taller is better, and then walking around, I'm tall, I'm taller than most people. And those taller people, they should crouch. So at least in the same room, at least I still come up on top, crouch lower, that's good. And so pride is that sense of not that I'm better at languages than some people, I speak better Tibetan than some people, and so on. That's just true. No, it's conflating as that I am a better person. I am, you know, that autonomous self-existent self, I am. I am better. That's pride. And that's a mental affliction. Because for just starters, again, hardly anybody else agrees with you. Problem. So Domdemba continued, Master, isn't pride due to having something, having some quality on the basis of which you feel you're better? Right? Isn't it because you have something, you're a really good piano player, or you're very good at masonry, or whatever? Aren't people pride because they have some virtue that they identify with? And then Atisha responds, fireflies think that there are no lights other than their own. So a little firefly can be very proud of how much light it has. You know, even as a speck, it's better than sheer darkness. So the fireflies mean, look at me, I'm pretty bright. And then Domjamba says, but Master, aren't they proud because they have even a speck of light, which is better than sheer darkness? Isn't that their basis for pride, a bit of light? And then Atisha gives a very interesting answer in the 11th century. And I checked to make sure it was really correct. It's exactly correct. So Domjamba said, well, fireflies can be proud because they have a little, they emanate a little bit of light. And then Atisha responded, Dom, all the suns and moons are not proud. Now, isn't that interesting in the 11th century? Where almost everybody on the planet thought there is one sun and there's one moon and Earth is in the center, and we have a nice constellation of all those decorations up in the sky called stars. That was universally believed, almost, except for not in the highly advanced civilization in which Atisha had been raised. The many suns, all the suns, all the moons. Well, in the cosmology in which he was trained in the monastic universities of India, this is just one world system. We call it a planet. They called it a loka. This is just one of countless throughout the universe. And they come in clusters of a billion-fold worlds, which would correspond kind of to galaxies. A world is a world only if it's inhabited by sentient beings. So some body of matter out there that has no life on it, call it an asteroid. But it's not a loka. And so in the Buddhist cosmology, there are clusters of billion-fold world systems, and there are countless of those. So that would mean many suns and many moons. A very interesting view. Buddhism has never been geocentric, ever. So compared to the fireflies, the suns and moons have much greater light, but they're not proud. In that case, Master, might pride lead one to the path or not? Now, the term pride in Tibetan has the same connotation as in English. One can be proud as an arrogant, conceited, really a jerk. This guy's so conceited, it's unbearable, so proud. On the one hand, clearly quite toxic, right? But then we have parents who are proud of their children, an artist who's proud of his work, a businessman who's proud of the business he runs, he's run it ethically, takes care of his employees, offers something really of value to humanity. Is, are you proud of your work? Are you proud of what you've accomplished? And the man said, yes. Or she says, yes, I'm very proud of my work. I've done a good job. That is not an impediment to enlightenment. So as in Tibetan, as in English, it can be very reasonable, reality-based pride, and it can also be completely toxic. So thereon hangs the tail, and that's where they're going in this conversation taking place 1,000 years ago on the other side of the world. When I say ancient wisdom from modern times, I'm listening to this, and much of it could be at any time in any place, as the truths, the depth of truths they're going to are universal. But might pride lead one to the path of liberation, awakening, path of genuine well-being? Might pride be helpful or not? And then Atisha gives a very interesting, nuanced response, easily understood. He says, if one has the pride of thinking, if I act for the sake of others, I shall certainly succeed in bringing about their welfare. That kind of pride, this will lead to the path. Dome, if one has the pride of thinking, if I engage in spiritual training, ethics, samadhi, wisdom, the 6 perfections, I shall certainly come to knowledge. This will lead to the path. If one has the pride of thinking, by having strong remedies, if I observe ethical discipline, avoiding what is unwholesome, cultivating the wholesome, I shall certainly prevail. This will lead to the path. So clearly, those kind of pride, no problem. But then Domjamba counters, I wonder if all of these are definitive pride. Definitive pride, I have to explain, my translation, it's pride as defined in Buddhist psychological textbooks, where it's among the mental afflictions, the 6 primary and 20 derivative. It's defined, pride, ngagel in Tibetan, it's defined as a mental affliction. It's rooted in self-centered attachment, and that's rooted in a delusional sense of self. Therefore, by definition, pride is a mental affliction. And so when a teacher is just given, well, here's a good kind of pride, here's it, and then Domdemba counters, but does that accord to the definition, as we know, because they've studied the Abhidhamma Samvichaya, for example? So are these definitive pride? I mean, are these by the book instances of pride as we understand them in Buddhist psychology, where pride is defined as a mental affliction? And Atish says, Dom, I didn't say they are, but it is the same term. Again, very much like English, pride is a good translation of this Sanskrit and Tibetan term. I didn't say they are. Master, I wonder if there is a kind of pride that does not bear all of its defining characteristics. That is there kind of pride that is not rooted in self-centered attachment, not in the sense I'm better, not in a reified delusional sense of I am? Is there another kind of pride? Could there be such pride? And Atisha counters, well, what kind of characteristics would it need to have? If it doesn't have the characteristics as defined in Buddhist psychology, then by how would you define it? What would be your definition, if not that which defines pride as a mental affliction? And Dom counters, masters, the one that indicate the defined object on its definitional basis. So it gives a very intellectual answer. The definitional basis is that upon which you impute the name. And then it's defined by way of its defining characteristic. So he's going into philosophy and a little bit of esotericism, intellectualism there. And Atisha counters, be quiet, don't. Shut up. Don't go there. We're not here to have intellectual exegesis of psychological text. Hush up, hush. I think that'd be nice. Don't hush. Thinking like that will not lead you to the path. Facsimiles of pride lead to the path. So pride here is defined as a mental affliction. They're things that may look somewhat like the mental affliction of pride, but they're facsimiles because they're not toxic. They're not mental affliction. And these can lead to the path, really free you of the inner causes of suffering. Master, are you saying that facsimiles lead to the path? Not the genuine article, but the imitation, the facsimile? And she said, well, then don't facsimiles lead to the path? And he said, well, Master, what facsimile leads to the path? And then he gives a fascinating answer here, out of the blue. He's going to really throw you some, in American baseball, we say out of left field, like where did that come from? Dom is just asking, give me a facsimile of something that actually leads to the path, away from suffering and the causes of suffering. And he gives this example. Dom, every time there is the recognition while dreaming that all phenomena are just like this dream, that's a facsimile of knowing the nature of reality as it is. A facsimile of wisdom, insight, vipassana, which severs the root of suffering. But this is in the context of a dream. But clearly, this is in the context of a lucid dream. You're dreaming and you know this is a dream while you're dreaming, okay, lucid dream. In the midst of that lucid dream, well, you're not enlightened, you're just having a lucid dream. With Stephen LeBarge, a world expert, we've led multiple workshops, I can't remember how many right now, people just very gifted in lucid dreaming. We did it repeatedly. They have no Dharma background, no context, they're just really good at it. It's like some people can improvise in music and so on. So we've had quite a number of people coming to the workshops that he and I co-led. They're just very gifted. Some of them can have a lucid dream anytime they want to. They just take a nap and they have a lucid dream. And so when you're lucid in a dream, that doesn't mean that you're closer to enlightenment just because you're lucid. Not necessarily. But it is a facsimile of, as the Buddha said, I am awake. I have awakened to the actual nature of reality. In a dream, when you are lucid, you've awakened to the actual nature of the dream, and you're not mistaking it for waking reality that is intersubjective, right? And so it's a facsimile of coming to know the nature of reality itself, but only within that limited context of a dream. But now in that context, you're recognizing this is a dream. I know this is a dream. I'm dreaming, and then recognizing, and in the waking state, it's a lot like this. That's a facsimile. In the waking state, things are not really absolutely objectively real, existing in and of themselves, and I am not really, really over here. This is like that, and that's a facsimile. And that's an insight that really could lead to very deep insight that could percolate into your waking state. So let's see where he goes from there. Master, if you want to refer to something definitive, that's a case in point. Something that a lucid dream is defined as such, and yes, that is a facsimile of awakening natural reality in the waking state. So that's a case in point. But nowhere does knowing, but now he jumps the rails. Atisha gave him an excellent answer, and then he jumps the rails in a very unpredictable way. But nowhere does knowing that heat is the defining characteristic of fire lead to the path. Okay, one can say, well, why did you say that exactly? And then he counters, well then, Dom, isn't heat the defining characteristic of fire? The characteristic by which you can accurately identify fire as fire. As a person recognizes the dream by its defining characteristics and recognize the dream as a dream, knows its significance for the waking state, so that's a facsimile that can lead to enlightenment. Well, if you recognize the defining characteristics of fire as heat, then does that lead you to liberation, just knowing how to identify fire? And so he first of all checks, isn't heat the defining characteristic of fire? And Dom Dumba responds, again, out of the blue, like, where did this come from? So I spent a lot of time with this. Master, if so, that is, if heat is the defining characteristic of fire, let's just pause and step back just for a minute. For those of you who studied Madhyamaka view of Nagarjuna, Prasangika, then you're very familiar with the theme, nothing exists from its own side, by its own characteristics, inherently, of its own nature. In German, the Ding an sich, the thing in itself. Nothing objectively or subjectively exists in that way. Phenomena exist independent upon conceptual designation. You have a whole bunch of chariot parts and they're assembled, and when you call it a chariot, then it's a chariot. And you call this is human being, and so forth and so on. But for something to exist, it depends not only on prior causal conditions and on the presence of its constituent parts and qualities, but it also depends on conceptual designation. It doesn't exist all by itself from its own side. It takes that participation of conceptual designation, verbal labeling. Now, both of these masters know this inside and out. But when it comes to fire, and it's heat, it's burning. Is fire only because you conceptually designate it? If you looked at fire and said, it's cold, it's an ice cube, does it become cold? When you experience fire, you or an amoeba or any other sentient creature, when you experience fire, this is raw and primal. Too much heat and sentient beings move away. Too much cold and they move away, right? This is really primal. Nothing to do with the frontal cortex and so forth. If anything exists inherently, wouldn't fire be a good candidate? Because whatever you call it, whatever you think about it, it's hot and it burns. And if you want to call it hot and burning, if you want to say that the defining characteristic of fire is heat, that's all very well, but it was before you said so. And therefore, one could easily think the presence or absence of fire has nothing to do with your observing it or labeling it. It's inherently existent. If anything is inherently existent by its own nature, how about fire? And that's why. Is fire inherently existent? Because it has defining characteristics. It already has them prior to our making up a word and giving it a definition. Anybody who's been burned by fire, you know what I'm talking about. So he asks, when Atisha says, where did that go? Back here. Isn't heat the defining characteristic of fire? It could seem like he's saying, isn't heat the inherently existent defining characteristic of the inherently existent fire, because it's already hot and therefore inherently existent. And their fire is always hot. It's never cold. And then Dom Dumba says, if so, are all phenomena permanent and truly existent? If you're saying fire is always fire, it's always hot, and it's inherently hot, permanently hot, it's never anything other than hot, then if you make an exception for fire, it's inherently existent, it's always existent as hot, then, well, how about everything else? How about water? How about air? How about space? How about molecules, elementary particles? How about electromagnetic fields? How about gravity? How about, is everything then unchanging, always what it is, and inherently existent? This is a very provocative counter, isn't it? Not trivial, didn't come out of nowhere. And then he says, it's not like that. There is, and I changed this one this morning. Atisha said, there is no basis for anything being permanent and, so you'll probably have or. It shouldn't be or, it's and. There's no basis for anything being permanent and truly existent, inherently existent. There's nothing in the universe, not the four elements, not the element of space, not nirvana, not anything at all, from elementary particles up to Buddha mind. There is nothing that is inherently existent and permanent at all, ever. So not fire or anything else. Master, does the truth of heat being the defining characteristic of fire have any such basis? Heat is the defining characteristic of fire. But does that not have a basis in objective, self-existent reality? And then Atisha starts playing. Dome, your words are hot. Like, that's sharp. That's sharp. Your words are hot. In Tibetan, if we say that anybody at all, this person, you say Rikwatsapa. Rikwatsapa means literally hot intellect. Hot intellect. He's really hot. Nothing about physical appearance that we've done to it in English. Oh, she's so hot. They would say Rikwatsapa. His intelligence is really hot. That means really bright, really, really sharp, right? And so that's what Atisha is telling his disciple. Ah, you're really sharp. You're really hot. That was hot. That was hot. He's praising him. That's hot. Okay, your words are hot. And then does that mean they're fire? So they're going to have some fun here. Why, Dome? Because you affirm that the defining characteristic of fire is heat, which it is, and you just said my words are hot. Dome, with this you identify something that seems to be really true. What seems to be really true, really powerfully seems to be really true, is that fire seems to be inherently hot. Truly, inherently, intrinsically from its own side, by its own nature, it's hot. It really appears that way. Objectively, it appears to be. But that begs the question, yes, it appears that way, but is that the way it really is? And I'll speak with a little bit of background in physics. There's nothing that's intrinsically hot. The sun's not intrinsically hot. If there's nobody there to experience it, it's just a whole bunch of photons being sprayed all over the universe. But the photons are not hot. There's no such thing as a hot photon. And all those nuclear explosions taking place, they're not hot. Objectively, from physics perspective, there's nothing out there that is hot or cold. It's just a matter of the degree of kinetic energy of the atoms. Space, empty of atoms, is not cold. The few particles, the few molecules out there in deep space at 3 degrees Kelvin, they're not cold. Those atoms are not saying, oh man, it's so cold, I wish I had a sweater. There is nothing cold or hot out there in the very nature of molecules or the sun or the moon. They're not objectively real. Hot and cold arise relative to somebody who's experiencing it. But that means it's not intrinsically in the object, in the sun, in the firefly, or in a campsite fire. They're not out there. But then the hot is not inside your thoughts or your brain. Your brain doesn't get hot. Your thoughts don't get hot. The heat is not really out there, but it's not inside your brain either. The heat is not just something you imagined. It's not just something that you concocted, as in the heat in a dream. So heat and cold are not inherently real. They seem to be. Oh, the fire is, oh, it's so hot today. The fire is so hot. but it's not there objectively. And is not in here subjectively. It actually has no location. So how can be something that isn't even located in physical space be inherently real as something physical? It's pretty interesting pretty quickly. But I've already gone a little bit over into lunchtime, so I'm already munching into your time for lunch. It gets better and better. They've just started. Okay? So we'll see. Who knows? Maybe we'll just spend the whole 5 days on this dialogue, but I hope we can move a little bit faster.